Non-Americans, how do you feel about your country being an ally of the US after today's Trump-Zelensky altercation? Story 1. The good news in this shitstorm: Trump, because he looked like a bully, just gave Zelensky and Ukraine a good image boost. Same thing with Canada. The moron only succeed to help Trudeau and his party, who were in big trouble for the next elections. Story 2. Pretty clear the US can't be trusted. Any deal you make with them is worthless. Any kind of agreements, whether official or just an understanding at leadership level, is worthless. Time to strengthen ties with countries we share values with. Story 3. Dutch guy here. It's time to step away from the US, and it's time for Europe to step up. For the Americans, you don't start trade wars against your allies. You don't back fascist dictators. You decided to no longer stand by our side, and it's time for us to accept it. Story 4. Well, as a Canadian, I feel like the alliance between us is dead. It's time for us to restart our nuclear weapons programs, which we gave up in exchange for American protection. Story 5. Belgian here. I feel betrayed and scared. I don't mind paying more taxes to increase our defense spending. US had a valid point to ask for that. But after today, it's clear the US is no longer on our side and we can't trust them. It will take decades to fix this, and I don't think it will be the same again in my lifetime. 39Y now. Story 6. Romania. Proud to say most of our TV channels are bashing Trump right now. Honestly, not expecting it, considering some of our own political problems lately. FK Trump and Vance as well. Ukraine and Zelensky are amazing. They are the stuff of literal legends. David versus Goliath style. Story 7. French here. I don't like my president, like any self-respecting French, but I believe he conveyed our general feeling Europe should not be a vassal of the US. They made it clear they would not uphold Article 5, therefore they have nothing to do in NATO. US should be kicked out of NATO and all their military expulsed from Europe, so we don't suddenly have an enemies with troops already on our soil. US is no longer an ally. Story 8. UK here. Pretty pissed at the moment, but then the USA has been an unstable child since 2001. We've seen all too well how your politics veer schizophrenically every 4 to 8 years, and this little tirade from Tangerine and the Couch proved it. You're an embarrassment, a joke. You like to lecture nations like the UK on important matters. At least we're not being led by a Putin handmaiden and his pet. You've sold your moral high ground and you're standing on the world stage for a lick of Russian taint, and you're all worthless whores. All because you couldn't stomach the idea of an intelligent black woman being in charge, that a squadron of you stayed home in protest over Israel, and an unimaginable group of your lesser-brained fucknozzles whinged about the economy and the price of eggs. You've humiliated yourself enough. Time to go home and sleep it off, Fatland. You're drunk. As an American, I'm sure everyone is now good and pissed off at us. I would be. Story 9. German here. We went to war for you. The US is the only country to ever call NATO for help, but if Europe needs help, you see that as an opportunity to leverage it into favorable economic deals. You start a trade war with us. Sorry, but this friendship is broken beyond repair. First time Trump was a mistake friends can forgive. The second time was a clear signal that you don't value our friendship anymore. You have chosen your side, and there is no point in holding on to a one-sided relationship. Story 10. I don't consider my country of Canada to be an ally of the US. They declared economic war on us. They can off. I don't direct this comment at anti-Trump and anti-GOP Americans. Story 11. Ultimately, it's a good thing. The West has been too dependent on the US for decades. As a result, the West has allowed or actively supported military action against nations where the reasons for said actions has been in part for American economic benefit. Europe can build an army to defend itself and won't have to prostitute itself to the US. Story 12. As an Australian, we have China doing live fire drills 150 nautical miles offshore. It's most likely a warning to stay out of it when they invade Taiwan. Story 13. As a Scot-Brit, America can get to. Europe needs to stand as its own force in the world and face down Russia and America. Furthermore, we need to build our own alliances and friendships. Make it clear to countries like Mexico and Canada that Europe will stand with them and protect democracy. Story 14. UK. We are not allies any longer. We need to move closer to our European friends, particularly militarily with the French, and reverse our crazy decision on leaving the EU. All this shows us like-minded Europeans and Canadians, Australians, etc. need to stick together against the bullies of the world: Russia, USA, China, etc. Story 15. Posted this before in another subreddit. I stand by it. This is over. For all that the US has done over the years, I as a European have always seen your policies and influence as a force for stability and even often peace. As a hegemonial means to strengthen your position even more and accumulate an ungodly amount of wealth that did not benefit your citizens in the slightest, but always better than any alternative. This is now over. You, your flag, your country, your idiotic citizens not able to even speak a second language, let alone understand anything going on in the world, your moronic government. The American century is over. Good riddance. You will not recover from this. I only hope what distribution of world power comes after will be more in service of the human race than you have ever been. You, before anyone gets overly offended, you does not necessarily mean you as a person, but rather the American population at large and the nation in general. I know this is ironic coming from a Canadian, but can you guys rise the EFF up and stop sitting on your hands while your president sides with a fascist dictator? This is way beyond your allegiance to your blue or red team. Your country stood for something, and your whole culture and ethics and country are being tossed in a dumpster fire while you bicker in the comment section. Step away from the keyboard and stand up, it's time. Story 16. My country is not an ally of the US, it's a Russian puppet state. This meeting just proved that the US is no longer the biggest counter to Russian imperialism, it's yet another Russian puppet state. Take it from a Venezuelan, Americans, there's a seismic shift among Europeans and Germans in their opinion of America. Even among those who used to be sympathetic towards the US, like me, the US, under Donald Trump, is our enemy, and consequences will very soon follow. Story 17. I'm expecting an announcement from the White House that the states will assist Russia in helping bring this tragic war to an end as swiftly as possible by giving them the support they need. And no, that isn't a joke, that's literally what I've expected since he was voted back in. Story 18. American here who did not vote for Trump in the last 3 elections. I don't blame Trump because as a 52 years old born and raised in NYC, I knew what he was about. I'm ashamed of my fellow Americans who voted for him and still support him to this day. For the next 4 years, don't depend or trust this country. Story 19. Scared, because with friends like that, who needs enemies? It's clear America, like China and Russia, is becoming a full-blown oligarchy, mob bosses with armies, pillaging their people and others for endless riches. We are their prey. Story 20. Canadian here, I am afraid the US will start bombing us by next month. Trump was a complete embarrassment, there was zero diplomacy and he's obviously working with Russia. Story 21. The US has to be treated like Russia at this point. More coordination between the EU, UK, Canada, Australia and some other countries, but we have to move away from the US. This is basically what every ally thinks of the US ATM. Story 22. I am done with the US. I am stopping all purchase of anything US produced or owned products or services. No need for tariffs, the theatrics and attack on a president of an invaded country, fighting for his people's lives. Trump and Vance are truly despicable, but all of those that allowed this to happen should be ashamed. We needed to step up, true, but now it is evident that the US is not leading anyone or anything. P.S. The heroes that helped free Europe from a fascist must be turning in their graves. Story 23. To all the Americans who say, but I didn't vote for him, remember that the next time you make sweeping generalizations about followers of Islam, or Russians, or the Chinese etc., who live in countries whose policies you don't agree with and drone bomb. Story 24. I want the EU UK to use this moment as a catalyst to finally wake up after 80 years of slumbering and decouple from the absolute intellectual and moral bankruptcy that is the US. We have the population, the wealth, the resources to become the third balancing great power between China and the US. Get accession moving again in the Balkans. Start the German, French, British industries roaring again. No more buying US tech weapons. Keep the funding and jobs internal. We should convene with Canada and Mexico to coordinate retaliatory tariffs on the US if he imposes them on any single nation entity. The EU needs to federalize and start to become the international player that Putin has always feared and that the US wouldn't feel comfortable ignoring while attempting to unilaterally sell out European land and lives in Riyadh with a dictator. Story 25. Well, the US gave them $350 billion to fight Russia. Anybody else give that kind of money to someone and not expect anything back in return. So I understand the US point of view. It's rough, but that's politics. ISN sweet here, starting to think joining NATO was a mistake. Better to keep the Yanks at arm's length. Story 26. What was he supposed to do? Let Russia just take over his country. Defending himself and his citizens somehow makes him the possible cause of WW3. Trump is a completely immoral, idiotic gremlin. Story 27. Trump is doing everything right. He wants peace. Zelensky wants to keep getting money to keep the war going just to kill more people. It's stupid. When Zelensky was peace he can come back. Y'all are so brainwashed by the orange man. I bet some of y'all are upset he's also exposing the FBI tool. Story 28. As an Australian, I'm furious with Trump. It's a despicable move. Poor Ukraine. Australia has been a long time ally with the States. It makes that alliance vulnerable also. I feel bad for Mexico, Canada and all the long-term relationships America has. The world has never needed stable, well-thought-out leadership more than it does right now from America. Story 29. Australian here. I think we should drop all imports of US weapon systems going forward and pull out of the AUKUS agreement. We've been tethered to the US since John Howard abandoned Keating's turn to Asia in 1997. Before all this, I've been of the opinion the US would invade us if we tried to take control of our mineral wealth, but would at least defend us as a client state. Now, I only think the former is true. They may end the Five Eyes Club soon. Trump seems to be dismantling Western power exactly as an adversary would at the moment. So be it. I now see the US as two-faced and no better than the China as a state. At least the Chinese lie to our faces with some logic and predictability when upset. I don't feel like we know the Americans anymore. Story 30. As an Irish man, it's the first time I've ever considered that we should not go ahead with the St. Patrick's Day visit to the White House. And I'm not even considering, I'm fully sure we should completely cancel it. They're debating it fairly fiercely in our Ireland at the moment. Slava Ukraine. Story 31. Norwegian here. We are disgusted with Trump and offended on behalf of Zelensky. The papers are writing that this might be the end of the West as we know it. We are a small country who share a border with Russia, so we are feeling this, ETA, and we have assets and land they want. Story 32. After many years of Australia living firmly up America's, wanting to emulate America in every way, I really hope people here are paying attention and don't make the same mistakes when we have to go vote. Story 3380 of all Canadians have recently come to detest the US, even before the broadcast of that travesty. After Russia, Canada holds the greatest number 1.3 of expatriate ethnic Ukrainians, including many war refugees, so pro-Ukrainian sentiment is high here in the Great White North, and I am certain that many Canadians are incensed by Trump's shameful display of diplomatic and political ineptness today. Before now, most of us have been pretty sure that Trump and his circus freak cabinet are little more than moronic bullies, religious nutbars and willfully ignorant thugs. But after today, Canadians know to a certainty that we are now engaged in a completely pointless economic, political, social and diplomatic war instigated by liars, morons, bullies, thugs, religious cultists, and despicably stupid men who have absolutely no moral center. I assure you, Canadians will respond appropriately to the US unwarranted aggression and vile betrayal of our friendship of 150 years, at both a national and an individual level, to America the nation, and to all you individual Americans. I say that you've lost the best friend you've ever had, or ever will have. Canada out. Story 34 Brit. I don't consider America an ally anymore. They're an adversary allied with Russia. America's susceptibility to Putin is disappointing but hardly surprising. I'm confident my government and the EU will stand firm with Ukraine. We need to move away from our reliance on American tech, and I am identifying alternatives to the few American products I buy. I hope everyone in Europe takes steps to move away from American products. Americans needs to experience economic consequences for their choices. Story 35 I forget which Canadian Prime Minister said Pierre Trudeau maybe that being a neighbor to USA is like sleeping with an elephant. You always worry about the elephant rolling over. The time has come. Story 36 Canadian. The conversation felt like I had an inside look into how unprofessional and crude the Can-US tariff discussions are going. The US is a house divided, rotting from within. I hope Canada realizes and moves quickly to the new reality. I hope people who are as frustrated with me donate to Ukraine's war effort. They will need our help. Story 37 As a Briton, I think that the so-called special relationship is nothing more than bullshit. The president and the vice president are two of the biggest cunts on the face of the planet. Don't get me wrong, we've got Farage who is an absolute slug himself, but at least he's not in charge. Trump, Vance, Musk and anyone who thinks that they're not completely and utterly despicable warts on the anus of humanity the US can burn. That atrocity of a meeting with Zelensky started by that chicken shit Vance was beyond sad. All of Trump and Vance's families deserve nice bouts of cancer. Scumbags, I'm so very angry. I've spent a good while being called reactionary, being told I was cynical or hyperbolic when I said that a second Trump term would be disastrous. Every single day since he has taken office, I am reminded that in hindsight I was being optimistic. He won't even need the whole term to destroy America. Their reputation worldwide is currently outside Russia, and am embarrassed to have ever thought of us as allies. I genuinely don't know if there is any coming back from this. We are watching the world change in real time. Story 38 As a Canadian, I'm disgusted to have America as a neighbor right now. I know it's not all Americans, but I wish only bad for him and all those who support that dictator wannabe. Story 39 Australian It is an embarrassment. What happens if China decides to invade us? Seems like Trump will back China or want all our mining, which knowing our government it would willingly sign over. I literally had to turn the video of today off. Americans should feel sick seeing your president act like this. The Ukraine was invaded, there is no rewrite of history that could change that. Story 40 An ally LMFAO He's threatened to annex my country. The USA, build a wall around it, fill it with maggoteers and it's the Gulf of America. I can't stand that place anymore. I hope the country collapses into the heap of dung that it is. All of this because the South lost the Civil War and less than a century later they get a black man for president. Get over it. Now they're bent on taking everything that isn't theirs and threatening lifelong diplomatic relations. For Russia, that country rot in. Let's just say that the American people would have my full support if they decided to have another American revolution. Story 41 English and a veteran. Same as I did before, all bluster. Couldn't care less. The American lefties Reddit is famously US left fearmongering is hilarious though. Story 42 American here who served 20 in our military and can tell you that if I were the leader of a foreign ally, I'd seriously consider breaking that relationship. Story 43 I'm ready for my state California to secede from this mess of a country. We didn't vote for this. Canada, please annex Washington, Oregon and California. We'll gladly become your new province. Story 44 The USA, they are the enemy now. American and am embarrassed. Donated to a local Ukraine support group. Trump, speaking as a European it's history when the next 911 happens don't call us. Story 45 So glad people are waking up to see how the worst and extreme version of USA can be, and now we can all stop worshipping USA so much and actually treat everyone more equal. Story 46 Lithuanian here. Well, having a border with Russia was never a positive thing, but now, knowing US is no better, well just prepare to fight and wait for European allies. By the way, US doesn't want China to get too much influence, but they do everything to off their allies. Close down USAID. China will happily invest some millions to have more influence in Africa and parts of Europe and show that they aren't really bad, and it's only second month of orange time in the office. Anyway, even we here somehow mutually just understood that boycotting US products is what we want to do, and I get that US citizens wanted him and probably 99 of his voters are happy. It's just not what they want in the long run, but that's for them to understand in the upcoming years. Story 47 Australian, we should be wary. He didn't even know what the AUKUS deal was, and who knows if keep the US involved in it. This debacle makes it pretty clear this administration can't be trusted. We have a federal election this year, and I'm worried Lord Dutmort is going to win and drag us right down into the shitshow along with the US. China is doing live fire drills off the coast. What's going to happen when they decide to invade Taiwan or decide they want our resources? Can't rely on America to help with that anymore. Trump and Vance finally put him in his place. $350 billion that has been given to Ukraine was the US taxpayers' money. Meanwhile, how much has Zelensky and his nation paid toward their war? Our country has 153.8 million citizens. That is 2,275 from each taxpaying citizen. I think people forget where the US government gets their money. Story 48 American, and am ashamed of our leadership. They even had Russian media outlets there. Story 49 I know this thread is for non-Americans, but as an American who served and lived overseas and has many foreign friends, I would strongly urge your countries to cut ties with us for now. I do not respect any leader that talks down to our allies, takes advantage of leaders who have little options and who hide behind this bullshit mantra of how great our country is. We are a mess and we need to suffer until the point is driven into people's heads. I am disgusted to be an American right now. I am not only disgusted with our elected officials but the utter lack of respect my countrymen have for the rest of the world. Being a great nation is not a zero-sum game. We can be great while also making other nations great as well. We do not and cannot achieve greatness at the expense of others, which this country has done for far too long. I thought the AI video of Gaza earlier this week was as distasteful as we could be. Today proved to the world that an alliance with the US is not in your best favor. Story 50 Ukrainian here. This is a betrayal, especially after the US was the initiator of nuclear disarmament of our country in exchange for security guarantees. And today history is repeating itself, but they cannot even answer what guarantees will be in exchange for resources. Now they do not even hide that they simply take and do not give anything in return. Therefore, today the states have shown more than once that you cannot be friends with them. Story 51 The USA became a bizarre clown show turning into an oligarchic-run dictatorship right now, and even if Trump is gone, MAGA will live on. Say goodbye to American democracy. It is dying right now at rapid speed. Time to stop being reliant on the US once and for all, which doesn't mean stop maintaining to have a good relationship. Story 52 We're not allies. Any agreement with the US at this point is subject to Trump's whims. Even deals he has signed himself he will just toss out. As a country the US cannot be trusted for anything, so any alliance is not worth the paper it's written on. Story 53 Turkey. Literally disgusting behavior from the orange man. He even made our president look like a decent guy. Does not feel good to be the second largest army in NATO and the first after US left. I hope our government does not get involved in yet another conflict. Strength to Ukraine. Story 54 As an American to our old friends. Please don't buy American products. Boycott us like we are Russia. Because we are the American oblast. Trump is an agent of the Kremlin and we have fallen under Putin's control. Story 55 I am a firm believer that Europe needs to work together to build a European army because it's clear we can't trust the US to be there for us when needed, and there's no way Norway can stop a Russian invasion on their own. Story 56 Poland Americans chose their side by sitting idly while this turd is driving their country into the ground and dragging the whole world along with them. You're on the wrong of history if you're not doing anything to drive him and Twitler out. Nazis, Russians and Russian assets can go get. Story 57 The US, fuming TBH. New Zealander we will move to have closer ties with China. They are already our biggest trade partner but I can see this pushing us closer to them. Story 58 Appalled and disgusted. We need to cancel AUKUS and put an end to Australia's military alliance with the US. We need to close Pine Gap and all the other US installations and bases. The US is no longer worthy of our alliance. Story 59 Icelander here. From Friday's meeting with Ukraine it should be clear to everybody that USA is no longer the leader of the free world and cannot be counted on as a reliable ally. Trump's behavior with Ukraine, Greenland, Denmark, Canada and Mexico has shown this clearly in a very short amount of time. Iceland and other European nations will have to unite and form a stronger bond, one without USA involvement. Story 60 The USA has steered away from European and the rest of the world's values for a long time. The second Trump era is the proverbial straw for me and a lot of others. Trump MAGA Canadian here. I know there are lots of great Americans, but MAGA, DJT, JDV and Elon. Story 61 I understand that people in this thread are mad, but we can't keep throwing money at other countries when our own house is broken. Maybe it's time for European countries to step up and stop relying on the US to resolve everything. Story 62 As a German, I feel a huge desire to get things in order in a way that would allow my country to become something it has been once in history. I want power, I want pressure, I want independence from the USA, I want to be strong again, I want to have intelligence that is capable of opposing the Americans and Russians. I want nuclear weapons and I want that all countries in Europe are on the same page. I want us to become a competitor and I am sick of being weak. If only this moment would unite us. But let's be honest. Besides hating Trump and Putin, we Europeans are what we are, diversified and we have different opinions in every thinkable object. Even if Germany would be strong and powerful again, it's not possible for any nation within Europe to lead in a way that everyone would want to follow, so I am forced trying mental gymnastics to even think about a European Union acting like a nation. It gives me headache because we are so weak and are unable to find a way that fits for everybody. It's just not possible because no matter how you put it, it's always France or Germany doing dominance and expecting smaller European nations to follow. I don't think we can overcome this anyhow in near future. What again, makes us weak and me kind of depressed. I hate losing. Story 63. I feel for Zelensky. The guy is an absolute hero and gets treated like this. I think there were a lot of things he would have wanted to say, but couldn't because it would hurt the position of his country. This is a dirty game they are playing to try and get him out and replaced by someone pro-Russian who does want peace. Story 64. Italian. Here I always admire the US. They were the good guys. In the first term Trump cabinet was composed by sane people, but right now I don't know how to express my distrust to the American government. I simply can't understand how the party of Reagan, who said the Soviet Union were the evil empire, became Putin lapdog. Story 65. Europe needs to stop around and invest heavily in their defense. Europe needs to remove all American troops from European countries. ASAP. With this administration, Americans can't be trusted. Story 66. The US is no longer a reliable ally. Today was just yet another nail in the coffin. Trump already suggested kicking us NZ out of Five Eyes, and similar comments were made about Canada too. Story 67. As a Brit, a little upset, because it was final confirmation of a truth I think a lot of people are desperately trying to ignore, that the US are no longer a reliable ally, or an advocate for upholding the international rule of law, and that the alliances that kept the peace in various parts of the world are dying if not already dead. The world has fundamentally changed and so has the United States of America. The US I grew up with is dead, if it ever existed at all. From the UK's perspective, I think our interests are now very much in ramping up our military capabilities as quickly as possible and reinforcing our relations with Europe. We've no other means of protecting ourselves or democracy more generally than that. Old grudges, Brexit, petty ideological differences, it all has to be all cast aside. As a continent it's united we stand or divided we all fall. Story 68. UK. At the rate things are going I don't think we will be allies for much longer. The fact that Trump, or Trumpsky as I call him, has been trying his best to off every allied nation tells me that Putin has his grubby hands in all of this. Story 69. Brit. I wouldn't trust any alliance with a man so openly self-serving and erratic as Trump. He runs his country like a mob boss extorting small business owners. He has no basis in ethics or concept of mutual benefit, so an alliance isn't worth the paper it's written on. We need to distance, not burn the bridge, but strengthen our ties to the EU, Japan, Australia and Canada. Story 70. Edit. Misread the title. My bad. I've been to Ukraine multiple times since the full-scale invasion. Some of those were within the past year. Let me tell you, I have never wanted to be American less than this very moment. I am embarrassed by the president and self-proclaimed mountain person J.D. Vance. Vance's comment that Zelensky brings diplomats on propaganda tours is so absurd. The war touches life everywhere there. I distinctly remember one day when I was questioned by two soldiers stationed in a town so small Google refers to it as a human settlement. This town with maybe 15 people still had a military presence out of sheer necessity. I didn't go with a group, didn't schedule any tours or anything. I went by myself and saw it for how it is. Everything you hear about the war, Russia's targeting of civilian areas, assassinations and attempts, whole towns being massacred, all of these things are true. The idea that Zelensky doesn't want peace is absurd. Yeah, I'm sure he loves the barricades all over Kiev and having to take trains and cars in and out of the country instead of just flying. I'm sure he loves the assassination attempts. These people in the White House are clowns. And so are the plurality of Americans who voted for this. Story 71. From the land of 1,000,000 welcomes. The actual translation of seed mile fealty is 100,000 welcomes. I will struggle to find a single one for any American for the rest of my life. Story 72. Did I have a stroke and am dreaming this whole parody? This shameful shitshow would be a disaster in a small business, let alone some big country government, and I always thought the CIA would shut down any threat. Story 73. Terrible. If you are a UK resident, please sign and share this petition. In all likelihood it will do all, but if a good few million sign it, it will give Starmer pause to reflect on his choices. I want to start a petition. Will you sign it? Sign the petition. Immediately rescind Donald Trump's state visit and host Zelensky in his place given the disgusting media circus bullying by the President and Vice President of the USA of Volodymyr Zelensky. We demand you immediately withdraw the offer of a state visit for Trump and show of solidarity to the Ukrainian people by hosting the Ukrainian president in his place. POTUS and his DOA have shown themselves unfit to lead with regard to Ukraine. This act would show the world just how strong the support for Ukraine is. Would the UK population have turned out en masse to support Ukrainian families, just to see it carved up like a roast for the USA and Russians' benefit? Sign the petition. Story 74. As a European, I feel like the US just simply isn't an ally anymore. Even China looks like a pretty sweet trade partner right now, and I hate China. I'm honestly waiting for the day the US completely implodes at this point. Backstabbing cunts. The one positive that could come from all of this is a stronger and more united Europe that has the US cut off from mostly everything. Perhaps this is the jolt that will wake up Europe's ruling class to realize the USA is not their friend and never has been. General de Gaulle was right to pursue a policy of nuclear independence, and I thank him for that. Story 75. This disastrous meeting for the US will actually unite Europe more and rally behind Ukraine. The US will be isolated and weakened. It will lose its status as the strongest country in the world, and it may never get it back. Times are changing and the world is too. Story 76. Australian. We need to recognize that Trump just reflects a societal change in the US. Trump won the election, but that has been 2 decades in the making. As mystifying to the rest of the free democratic world as this is, it just goes to show how the country has changed. We should be cooling the alliance and realizing that we can't rely on the US to be there as an ally. We need to focus on building our capacity. Story 77. Ireland. Here, we usually send our Taoiseach to meet the US President for St. Patrick's Day with a bowl of shamrocks. It's an important annual diplomatic visit. All the Ireland subreddits and social media are alive with discussions about whether this year we should boycott the visit. I'm absolutely sickened by Trump and think we should have nothing to do with him, and my sense is I'm not alone. Story 78. Mexican. Here, look, I think Trump's a horrible person, but I'm surprised Europe is just waking up to the realization of what we hear in Latin America, and other countries that have suffered coups, economic blockades, installed dictatorship, funding of cartels, etc., already knew. America has always been like this. They've always been using other countries to benefit themselves. Why did you realize that just now? Just because they treated you nicely. The only good thing coming out of Trump's administration is that more and more countries will finally realize what we in the global south already knew: they've never been anyone's ally. Story 79. Aussie. Pretty disgusted by all that's going on. Our Prime Minister Albanese, just after the Trump-Zelensky clash, declared that AUS stands with Ukraine. It would have been so easy to just keep quiet and continue with the status quo, but he spoke up, and I'm proud that he did. We have an election coming up quite soon. The LNP, essentially our right wing, who are backed by mainstream media and falling into Trumpism, are doing their best to undercut out current PM. I don't love Labour, but they're doing a lot better than the LNP. I'm increasingly worried about future political country relationships and me and my partner's future. Story 80. Canadian. Here, the USA, that fascist of a country to and back. I stand with Zelensky and the EU. We need to rally a worldwide boycott on the USA. Total shitshow. Showing Ukraine down is tragic, but the bigger news is that Trump has publicly admitted that US is incapable of negotiating with Russia for the next 4 years. Which in turn means that going forward US-provided security guarantees are completely meaningless. My guess is that EU will have to fund Ukraine because there is no other way left to weaken Russia. And then Trump will threaten to pull out of NATO, claiming that US doesn't want friction with Russia. And he eventually pull out of NATO and say that EU made him do that. Story 81. Deep down I knew the USA was the enemy. Consumerism destroying the planet, all the CIA they gotten away with. In my life they're the only ones that have really going around starting wars, but this is now openly obvious. Know your enemy. Story 82. I'm Canadian. The USA, I think most Western countries are second thinking being allies with the US now. It's absolutely bonkers. The US blaming Zelensky for Russia invading Ukraine is absolutely surreal. Story 83. The US, seems like my country will have to meet them on our own soil. All the years of trade and alliance. Let Canada be a lesson to the world. Never trust the Americans. I'm Canadian. Don't think we are allies. We used to be, not now. Story 84. As an Australian, with Chinese ships cruising around our waters doing live fire exercises. Not super. Seriously though, they are unreliable at best. Time to move in with Japan and the EU. Japan, because the EU will not give about Southeast Asian Pacific politics. Story 85. The USA is a failed democracy. Only 2 parties and a celebrity president. It is clear that the country is unable to function as a democracy as the 2 parties are so divided. The for-tat nature of the politics means that no progress is made. The world is seeing that the USA is unreliable and a liability. The empire of celebrity has reached its peak and will now crumble as it loses influence. Story 86. Trump has turned America into a protection racket. Him and Putin are dividing up Ukraine like Hitler and Stalin divided up Poland. It's sickening. Europe is the leader of the free world now.